Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turned out a poem 766. My faith is larger than the hills. Now, of course, this will take us back to the hills of poem 729, 722, 327, reminding you as well that the Pelham Hills right outside of Emily's window of her bedroom. She could see these hills. Of course, this whole project of seeing mountains or hills as being somehow significant is central, I think, in many ways to reading a whole bunch of Emily Dickinson's poetry. Here, though, she's going to concentrate on faith, but faith as the writing process of the poet herself. I think Emily is dancing in this set of lines with Christ's comment in Matthew 17, 18 through 20. And Jesus rebuked the devil, and he departed out of the man, and the child was cured from that very hour. Then came the disciples of Jesus apart and said, Why could not we cast him out? And Jesus said unto them, Because of your unbelief. For verily I say unto you, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, Remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily's our playlist. Hopefully you've worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 765 poems. We just finished with 765, You Constituted Time. Now, much of this poem, I think, is attributable to Percy Bysshe Shelley's classic Defense of Poetry. We've given comments on it at learnstrong.net. Shelley arguing that the most important individual in the world is the poet. I think Emily's going to make a very similar argument here. The poet's work, the poet's product is vital. She says it this way, My faith is larger than the hills. So when the hills decay, my faith must take the purple wheel to show the sun the way. 'Tis first he steps upon the vane, and then upon the hill, and then abroad the world he go to do his golden will. And if his yellow feet should miss, the bird would not arise, the flowers would slumber on their stems, no bells have paradise. How dare I, therefore, stint of faith on which so vast depends, lest firmament should fail for me, the rivet in the bands. Now, obviously, we're going to ask, is this hyperbole, is this exaggeration? Or is Emily, in fact, arguing that her poetic project, her faith, by the way, faith used in 48 poems, is larger than the hills, more important than the hills, if you will? So she says, my faith is so large that when the hills decay, that is to say, it gets dark outside because the sun is going away, my faith must take the purple wheel, she loves this word purple in 55 of her poems, to show the sun the way. In other words, we know that Emily wrote many of these poems in darkness, in the early morning hours, for example. What is she arguing? She's saying that when I have to, my poetic project can sustain the very world of nature itself. She'll say, 'tis the sun. First he steps upon the vane, and then upon the hill, the sun going down. And then abroad the world he go to do his golden will. Now, this takes us back, of course, to our study of that poem. This is my letter to the world, 441, that never wrote to me. She's playing a very similar kind of game here. And she says, I can tell the sun ultimately what to do if I need to, because I'm a poet. And if his yellow feet, notice we're going from purple to yellow, should miss, notice we're going from decay to miss and then ultimately to fail, the bird would not arise, the flowers would slumber on their stems, no bells have paradise. In other words, if the sun doesn't do what the sun does, then the world of nature implodes. Then she'll finish, how dare I, therefore, stint a faith on which so vast depends? And there it is. I think her argument is that the work of the poet is so significant that everything else hangs on it. Now again, is she being hyperbolic here? Lest firmament should fail for me. And again, we notice we go from decay to miss to fail. The rivet in the bands. Interestingly, that in this poem, notice there is no in punctuation. We've seen this in a couple of poems. Here, for sure, we see this. I think the argument that she's making, even in her punctuation, is without the poet, there is no true nature. Can we say it? There is no faith. Her faith, her poetic project, is that important. Now, when we get to poem 1551, near the end of our study, she'll play a similar game. Those dying then knew where they went. They went to God's right hand. That hand is amputated now, and God cannot be found. The abdication of belief makes the behavior small. Better an ignis fautus than no illum at all. This idea that if God cannot be found, then there is something fundamentally missing in the universe. And I think for Emily, her faith is in her poetic project. Probably, we would argue, more than her faith in some kind of orthodox religion that she was raised with. At 2a, I think the argument she's making here is that the artistic act is in itself an act of faith. And I think she's also making the argument that even the sun and the rotation of the sun depends on Emily and the poems that she is writing. It is, if you will, that important. Well, obviously at 2b, the question of the tone, is this hyperbolic, is this exaggerated, or is she in fact saying something that is profound about the project that she is engaged in as a poet? At 3a, I mentioned Shelley's defense of poetry. We can think of Czesław Miłosz's treatise on poetry. What is it that he says in the opening lines? That a good poem, a good set of lines can carry more weight than an entire wheelbarrow of prose. It's a beautiful way to say it. Finally, at 3b, what are your thoughts about this poetic project of Emily's, this faith of hers? Do you think it really is that important?
I hope you do. Thank you.